down in the chat box. Notice that the drop down in the chat box allows you to chat to everyone or privately to an individual. And just to note that this presentation is being recorded, thank you, Megan, and we will be making it available on AFT's website along with the resource handout I believe you got in your reminder email this morning. The breakout groups themselves will not be recorded. And there's a leave meeting button there in case you have to whisk yourself away, but we do hope you'll stay for the full 90 minutes here. We've intentionally capped these workshops at 30 people for more intimate conversation and setting, so we hope you'll stick around. And then lastly, we're going to be running a few polls throughout this webinar to gauge where the audience is at and to keep you guys on your toes. So we're actually just going to start with this first polling question. Take a minute to fill it out, and we just love to get a sense of who is in the room. So just take a minute and all that apply. Okay, so as you're filling that out, I'm gonna keep plodding on here. So and we'll get to your results in just a second, but I wanted to really just extend a formal welcome to all of you. This is the first webinar of the Farms for the Future project, and this webinar you're in supporting and sustaining farms, farmers, and farmland in your community. My name is Jamie Pottern, and I'm the New England Program Manager at American Farmland Trust, and I'm going to be your MC for the next 90 minutes. It looks like, just looking at the results of this poll, really quick, it's really interesting. We've got a nice mix of municipal volunteers, about a third of you are land trust staff, nonprofit sector, a couple regional planners, and a bunch of other. So I'm curious to know who you are, you other folks. We'll get to you later. So great mix. I'm glad to have you all with us. So this workshop and the full series was created through the partnership and incredible efforts of the following people and organizations. So my colleague Megan Fowler and myself at American Farmland Trust, Stephanie Morningstar at the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, who you'll hear from in a little bit, Meg Quinn at Maine Farmland Trust, Jeremy Lugee at Southeast Land Trust of New Hampshire, and Nancy Everhart at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And this project has been generously funded by Jane's Trust. So over to the next slide. We're joined today by some really wonderful guest speakers, some true powerhouses in the field of agriculture and land protection in our region. I'm really excited to have them on today. Julia Friedgood, who's AFT's Farm for New Generation Director and Senior Advisor, Steph Morningstar, who's the Executive Director at the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and Amy Manzelli, who's an attorney with the BCM Environmental and Land Law. So as I'm sure is the case for projects that you all are undertaking in your communities right now, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted this project in many ways. It's required our planning team to really adapt what were originally supposed to be in-person workshops into this virtual format. So do bear with us as we lean into this technology. But it's also really brought into sharp relief the strengths and weaknesses of our local food systems here in northern New England. And there seems to be really a growing interest and awareness of the critical role that local farms and farmers play in community resilience and well-being, and just like a real desire for more skills and training to affect change at the local level, as well as how to advance greater land justice. So it's really like this exciting moment to be having this project, which we were already planning on. And this webinar in particular is the first in a 5-part series of these educational workshops for land trusts and municipalities specifically, as well as any other nonprofits and service providers here in New Hampshire who want to better understand how to support farms and farmers. So each workshop will offer core content, state-specific tools and resources, Q&A, networking opportunities, and each one builds off the previous one. And so we really encourage you to try to attend as many of these as possible, or to watch the recordings of each of these, which we'll make available on our website. So today's workshop is really a broad overview of the principles and tools for developing more farm-friendly communities. And it's followed over the next 5 weeks by these other workshops you see up here on the screen. We're really going to dig into tools for protecting land, solar siting on farmland, tools for making farmland available to farmers, and then a whole workshop on tools and resources for supporting Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color in your community. So we'll go over the dates of these and other upcoming workshops at the end of the presentation, but we really just wanted to orient you to this full series and why we're all here. And then just community expectations. So as we all navigate the topic of land policy and land justice in this learning space together, we invite you just to be inquisitive while open to others' perspectives and worldviews. We encourage you to be as present as possible in listening and engaging during these 90 minutes, but we also want you to be comfortable. So make sure to get up and get a cup of coffee or tea, whatever you need that helps you focus. We understand there's a lot of virtual time in our lives these days. And we hope that through listening and learning in this space, that we can all sort of leave this workshop with a commitment to continue learning and taking some really concrete actions to advance this important work in our communities. And then lastly, I'm just going to tee up the agenda here, and then I'll let our speakers get to it. Over the next 90 minutes, you're going to hear from Steph Morningstar. She's going to briefly frame some of the complex and difficult realities around land dispossession of Indigenous communities and people of color farmers here in New England. And we just want to note this frame of reference is really vital to our work, and our planning team and speakers will be weaving this topic and farmer voices into the workshops that follow in the series. Julia Friedman will then provide an overview of some of the ongoing threats to land in New Hampshire and also share some of the messaging tools and principles that you can use when advocating for farm-friendly communities. And then Amy Manzelli is going to give us really a deep dive into some of the specific tools for advancing this work here in New Hampshire. We'll then have a Q&A with all the speakers coming on, followed by a short breakout group activity, and then a quick report back from the facilitators before we try to wrap all this up at 3:30 and get you on with your day. So without further ado, we're gonna play a short video with some remarks from Steph Morningstar. She pre-recorded this video, but she's also available on the call and available to answer questions after. And I just wanted to mention that this video is part of a longer presentation that we'll be sharing in later webinars in the series. So we definitely encourage you to come back for more detailed historical context and more specifics about the work of NEFOC and the great work that they're doing in our region. So Megan, if you can tee up the video, we can start that.
Greetings, everybody. It's Stephanie Morningstar, Executive Director of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. We're here today to present to you some brief information about the history of land dispossession and racism in the U.S. It's important for us, before we begin talking about land, to talk about the history of the land that we all occupy. Now, I know that this may not seem like this is something that applies to you or applies to your particular land trust or service organization, but if you think about it, you know, maybe you think, well, all farmers matter, or, you know, we don't have any farmers of color in our community, so this doesn't really apply to us. Well, I'm going to push back a bit on that because there has, and this is one of the ways that we're going to illustrate why, yes, all farmers matter, but, you know, there are reasons for why some farmers are not getting a fair shake in this world or in this community or in this quote-unquote industry. And there's a history of dispossession of land and racism that we really do need to be aware of while we're working with the land itself, as well as knowing that the lands that we occupy have a very specific history that we have to pay attention to. So, you know, I'm here to deliver a message. I'm here to share the work that we do. I'm here to share one of the reasons for, or some of the reasons for why we do the work we do. And if we're working on land, then I think it's, you know, it's important for us to understand the history of those lands. So the map that you're looking at is a map of the Northeast, and you can see the Great Lakes here, and you can see all of these blobs of color, and they're all overlapping, and it's kind of an interesting, unique looking map. What this is it's a map called the Native Land Map, and this is a map that shows the territory that we serve, the Northeast part of the United States. Only it doesn't look like the Northeast part of the United States right here. It looks somewhat different, and the reason it looks different different is because these areas here are all different indigenous territories, and you can see that they overlap somewhat, and that they don't have any defining state line boundaries or anything like that. So this is the area that we all currently occupy, and the area that many of us are serving. Greetings, everybody. So ultimately, the reason for why we're here today, and the reason for why the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust exists, is because 98% of land in the United States, farmland in the United States, is currently controlled by white landowners. And as one of our founding NEFOC Network members, Leah Penniman, author of Farming While Black, says, this is not an accident of history. And as you can see in that very, very brief rundown with this timeline, that history can show you very, very clearly the systems that were put in place in order to dispossess people of land. How is this affecting us today? Well, nearly 100% of the farmland in the Northeast is owned by white folks. We have a very tenuous relationship with land leasing and being able to achieve permanent and secure land tenure. In addition to that, we also, as people of color, carry something called comorbidities, and because of the level of stress and the poverty and disenfranchisement that we've experienced over the years, that's also affected our bodies. In fact, right now with COVID-19 happening, Black folks make up 34% of COVID-related deaths, but only make up 13.4% of the population. And 33% of Black folks actually require hospitalization due to these comorbidities and chronic illnesses due to inequity in the food system. So this is why we exist, and this is why we're here, and this is just a quick peek at a very small portion of the group that forms the Northeast Farmers of Color and our network and our land trust. And we're going to be presenting throughout these webinar series. So this was just a quick brief peek at some of the reasons for why we do the work that we do, and to give you an idea of maybe some of the reasons or some of the things that you need to think about when you're working on land or with land, whether or not you work with Black, Indigenous, POC farmers, just to understand a little bit more about the history of land dispossession as it's related to the Department of Agriculture, and just land dispossession in general. We just feel like it's very important for you to understand that. So it'll frame up a bit more about our work and our what calls us to action. And I really appreciate you hearing us today. For more information, you can go to nefoclandtrust.org. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch at connect@nefoclandtrust.org. So ultimately,
Great. Well, thank you so much, Steph, for that video. And again, we look forward to having you on all of these on the series, and for all the great contributions that you and NEFOC do. I'd like to now introduce my colleague Julia Freedgood at AFT to wow us with some powerful data about the state of agriculture in New Hampshire.
Thanks, Jamie, and I hope I am wowing and not just boring everybody with lots of data, because I love data. But before I start, I really want to thank staff for giving us this really important introduction. What I'm going to say is framed very much within the 21st century in a very short time period. And I think she gave us a longer view of things and a view of the sort of historical dispossession and discrimination that's happened in our world of working on land ownership, land retention, and ultimately farmland protection. So thank you for that. And now let's begin. Do we have a poll, I think, to be in? Here we go. So yeah, if you could just fill out the poll, why do you care about saving farmland in your community? And unlike Jamie, I don't have kind of a filler to do here. So you're just gonna have to take your time, fill out the poll, and then we're gonna get your results, and I will think about them later when I talk about my reasons for saving farmland. Ah, very interesting. Okay. Laura, will you write those down so I remember them when I get there? That I really appreciate this this view of things, and I hope I don't bore you too much with all the economics that I'm going to be giving you in a second. So, Megan, can you advance the slides? So when we're thinking about farming in New Hampshire, there's a lot to say. The workshop series is in the context of farmland protection overall. So I'm really going to focus on 3 main areas, which I think are especially important. Conversion of farmland, and that's where we're going to start, and that's what this slide is all about. Then the economic outlook, and then the increasing number of retirement age farmers and maybe the dearth of younger producers coming in behind them. So with this slide, we've put together quite a few different things. The map on the left comes out of recent work that we did on a project called Farms Under Threat, the State of the States, where we looked at 2 types of conversion of agricultural land, and we've combined them, and they're shown in red on the map. And they include conversion to urban and highly developed land uses, as well as low density residential land uses. And then we juxtaposed it against, both all farmland, but also the higher quality of farmland in your state. And that's what shows up in green. And so here you get kind of a visual impression of where your development has happened and on what quality of farmland it's occurred. And you'll see there's, a lot of development around the coast and around Portsmouth, but it actually is scattered pretty much throughout the state. On the right side, what we have is kind of, hot off the presses and still in development. So probably not entirely complete, but we're trying to create a protected ag land layer or farmland layer to go along with this so that states can see how much land they've permanently protected. And in New Hampshire, what we see is about 16,500 acres have been permanently protected through purchasing ag conservation easements or some donated easements. And we're trying to reconcile state data with the conservation easement database data. So trying to get a good picture. And you can see it's very much clustered, again, in that sort of southern corner on the eastern side. And not surprisingly to me anyway, along the Connecticut River Valley, where you have a lot of really high quality farmland and a lot of development pressure. And so then the takeaway is that, in 15 years, from 2001 to 2016, which is what our map on the left shows, New Hampshire converted 11,600 acres, but over the lifetime of all its protection efforts, it's protected over 16,000 acres. So next slide. At the same time, as part of this work, we did a state policy scorecard. So I know a lot of you are interested in local responses, but for this project, or Farms Under Threat, we looked at state. And New Hampshire ranked 16th nationally in our Ag Land Protection Scorecard, which looked at 6 different kinds of policies, starting with purchase of agricultural conservation easements or development rights, then looking at state level authority for land use planning, property tax relief like current use programs, which you have in New Hampshire, ag districts laws, which are voluntary ways to kind of put a package of things together to encourage people to protect their land, which you don't happen to have in New Hampshire. Farm link programs, which link retiring farmers with junior farmers, which you also don't have a public program, but have some private activity and work with Land for Good. And then state leasing programs, which you have in New Hampshire as well. And those are state leasing that allow agricultural use on that state land. And you can see in green sort of where your score is against the median, which is light blue, and then dark blue at the top. And so the takeaway, we have this little thing we call the rubric, which is in the bottom of the slide, is that you've had a medium threat of conversion and you've had a medium state policy response. So, they seem to add up together, but I think at the local level, there's a lot more that can be done. And so that's kind of where we're going to focus going forward. If you want more information about this work, we have an interactive website where you can download data and you can play with data and you can look at maps and you can get all the background, and it gives you a link to our report and highlight summaries and all that. So please check it out. We would love to share that with you. So then in terms of the economic conditions, and in my experience, when I go to a group of farmers and they ask me what I do and I say I protect farmland, and they say pretty often, well, the best way to protect the farmland is to protect the farmer. That's in the context usually of economics, and the economic trends in agriculture have not been great, especially for New England type agriculture and small and mid-sized farms. So what we've seen in the 20th century is the number of farms fell by more than 60%, while average farm size increased 67%. As agriculture became increasingly mechanized and specialized, farm labor dropped from about 40% of the workforce to less than 2%. And 97% of family farms account for 85% of production, but most of those are small, with what USDA calls small as annual gross revenues of under $350,000 a year. But that wealth is concentrated on fewer and fewer larger and larger farms. So next slide. Consolidation also is happening in New Hampshire. And so we just put this slide up to give you a sense of what it looks like in your backyard. And again, what you can see is the change in economic class over time kind of tells the story. While most economic classes' contributions have gone down, the contribution of farms with $1 million or more of revenue have gone up, and they're contributing now to almost half of the state's total market share. So New Hampshire farms are struggling to survive, and you know, I guess it all comes out in that last number of 68% had net losses in 2017. So that's averaged out over everybody. Hang on, sorry, I got a little behind here. This slide shows the proportion of markets by market of farms by market share. So also giving that same idea, the vast majority of your farms are very small, less than $10,000 a year of income, but actually 80% or less than 50% of annual income. And then you have this tiny number that actually control most of the market. And so when you think of sort of how to move forward, to me, a lot of that movement is in the middle of this chart. What can we do to help those small commercial and mid-sized farms really thrive and keep their land and farming going forward? All right, so next slide. And then the good news is that local food markets are growing. So it was great to see sort of everybody's enthusiasm about that, because I think that's where there are a lot of opportunities for smaller farms and farms that have really close community ties. About a third of New Hampshire's farms are involved in direct-to-consumer or intermediated sales, which are, you know, things like farm to institution kind of sales. And these sales have been growing quite steadily through this century, and so are really starting to have a sizable economic impact. But expanding these opportunities requires good planning, and planning for infrastructure, cultivating community support for agriculture. Meeting demand from these markets is going to require at least as much land as we have, but probably more land. And more farmers are going to have to balance the challenges of farming in metro and adjacent counties, so areas where you have a lot of development pressure, especially the sort of insidious low density residential development that's part of our farms under threat analysis. So as that kind of LDR, as we call it, development expands across the countryside, our farmland and the bounty of fresh food and milk and other products that it supports are really at high risk of conversion, especially when they have low profit margins. So this is where we really need to pay a lot of attention. The other thing going forward is, oh, Megan, skip the next slide. It should be the maps. There we go. Is that senior farmers and not so much in New England, but in the Midwest in particular, non-farming landlords own a sizable proportion of US ag land. And those are farmers and landowners over the age of 65, controlling about 371 million acres. So that land is likely to transfer in the next 20 years, let's say. So we pay a lot of attention to that. Oh, you can go back at AFT. The other thing is this sort of dynamic of the ratio of producers who are over the age of 65 to those who are very young, under the age of 35. And you can see New Hampshire kind of stands out as having 4 to 5 times as many. New England is a little bit in the middle of the pack in this analysis. So now we can go to the next one, Megan. So then we have sort of the shot of the distribution in New England, or in this case, we circled northern New England. And what you can see is really sort of where those patterns play out in New Hampshire. And dark red represents 5 times as many over age 65 as under 35. And you can see that that's about 5 times as many in New Hampshire as in some of the other states. So New Hampshire is basically toward the older end of the spectrum. Okay, now we can move ahead. There we go. Thanks, Megan. Everybody, we were definitely rushed to the finish, so our slides are not exactly in the right order. So this gets me really to, you know, sort of where we started and what you folks said at the beginning of why save farmland. And I didn't intend to paint a dire picture, although sometimes it feels a little bit dire, because the threats to farms, farmers, and farmland are real and they're growing. Assuming we're participating in the webinar because we care about them and we care about the future of agriculture and communities, I'm going to outline some of the reasons that I myself think it's important to protect farmland. I'm not going to go through an extensive list, and you may have some more ideas than I do or different ways to think about these issues, but I thought it was a good way to have a start. And I really appreciated the emphasis that you all put on sort of food security and food sovereignty, which I'll get to in a minute. If you want more background data to make the case, really get in touch with me or call our Farmland Information Center and we can give you more going forward. So, you know, when we think about it, you know, these are the things that we put up on the slide. These are the things that we think are important. And I think climate resiliency has become one of those things where we're learning that agriculture has a larger role to play than we thought in the past. We did some work in California, which found that ag land produces far fewer GHG emissions than land converted to housing or commercial use. Our Greener Field study found farmland converted to other uses emits greenhouse gases at a level 58 to 70 times greater than if it had stayed in farming. At the same time, ag land managed with regenerative practices or, you know, good conservation practices can help combat climate change by sequestering carbon in the soil. And then, of course, farmland provides lots of other natural services from air and water quality to wildlife habitat. In terms of culture and community, I think that sort of speaks for itself, and we have a long and proud agrarian history here in New England. I think that when I think about Steph's comments, I think we need to really think about our own connection to the land in terms of a larger, longer connection to the land. But I think that's something that just resonates with all of us emotionally. And then, I need to speed up here. So in terms of fiscal, many of you may be familiar, we have done there have been 150 cost of community services studies done across the country, showing that farmland pays more in local revenues than it gets back in services. And so that's really a good argument for why we want to keep farmland and farming in our communities. And also when there are good economic opportunities, farmland, especially when you look through the whole food system, can provide a way to grow wealth in rural communities. We all agree that food security and food sovereignty, which takes food security to another step and really looks at the ethical component and, you know, producing through ecologically sound and sustainable methods in a way that is fair and equitable to the people involved, is a high priority. And since we're going to have a whole webinar on solar siting, all I will say to that is that Farmland also can provide land that you can do renewable energy on, as well as producing food and environmental quality, actually. So long and short, there are going to be 10 billion people on Earth by 2060, 400 million in the US and as many as 17 million in New England. So let's all get it together and save our land so that we can provide that food security and food sovereignty in the future. And so for the last few minutes, Jamie asked me to kind of dig in and talk a little bit about the how, not just the sort of the what and the why, but the how, and how we can create communities that are farm friendly. And so communities have lots of assets, starting with the people who live there and their relationships, what some people call social capital. I like to call relationships. Other assets include natural and cultural resources, physical infrastructure, businesses, financial resources. And so if we build off those assets while recognizing the constraints, but really taking advantage of what we've got, we can address agriculture and food systems in a comprehensive way across multiple sectors. So next slide. Oh, that was 5 minutes already? Oh my goodness. So long and short, I'm gonna make a pitch that we need to plan. I know a lot of people when they filled out their surveys said, plans just sit on shelves, and that's true. But you have to start somewhere, and it's important to plan for agriculture to get the process started. We'll go to the next slide. I think the principles involved in it are really important. And so taking a systems approach, really thinking through what Steph was talking about how we value and engage and involve the people in our communities. And that's all the people in our communities, including farmers, but also including people of color. And maybe people that we haven't recognized are in our communities and really need to work with, building on assets. And then the really big takeaway, so that your plan doesn't sit on a shelf and collect dust, is make a plan that has implementation in mind. And really, that's to me the most important piece. And so when I think about the planning process, we have a lot of questions that you can read on the slide. To me, at the heart and the soul of it is this community engagement. And in that then leads to all the other things that you always do in a planning process, from visioning to doing community assessments and collecting data, to generating ideas and recommendations, to implementing and really focusing on that implementation, but not stopping there. And we put it in a circle for a reason, because once you implement, you have to evaluate, did it get you what you wanted in your vision and in your goals? And then you adjust, and so you need metrics. And we'll go to the next one. Moving rapidly along. So in terms of planning for agriculture, I tend to put it into 4 buckets. Megan, you're gonna have to hit all of those little bubbles. So protecting farmland, supporting ag development, creating community connections, and promoting conservation. And we'll just go to the next one because I know I'm out of time and I wanna leave time for questions at the end. So there's a whole workshop coming on protecting farmland. In New England, people rely a lot on purchase reg conservation easement programs. I think at the local level, you're not going to be generating $1 billion to buy easements, but municipal governments can work closely with land trusts and look at ways that you can leverage money and prioritize together. Another thing is to ask yourself, is farmland addressed in my comp plan? Do you know? Find out. What is in the comp plan? Is it going to move you forward? You can also do things like creating an ag commission or an advisory board. And then doing things just to make sure that when new neighbors move into the community, they know that farming is practiced here and that it's valued, and not to do nuisance suits or unnecessary nuisance suits. So then we also have, moving forward, supporting ag development. And there's a lot you can do within your planning documents. But you also can provide marketing and promotion support. You can participate in farm to school or farm to institution. You can lease land to farmers. I love this picture because it's a farm actually near me in Massachusetts. where they used some ag viability funding at the state level to invest in diversifying their operation. They raised Jersey cows, and now they make ice cream as well. And it's delicious. So that's one way you can go, is allowing, you know, processing and so on. And then, of course, promoting natural resource conservation and planning for that. And one really concrete thing to do is make sure you're supporting and encouraging your conservation districts. And then the final slide, so I'm going to make it on time, is to create community connections. And this is actually, you know, it's cheap, it's easy, and it's a really good place to begin. So make sure that either in your master plan or your comp plan, you have an ag purpose statement. But if you don't, write one of your own and make it something that people are aware of. Do all kinds of things to reduce conflicts between farmers and neighbors. If you have public land, leave space for community farms or gardens or shared kitchens, if you have facilities that could be used for that. And then, of course, supporting direct-to-consumer marketing, whether that's farmers markets or allowing people to have CSAs on their farms, or, you know, again, to do value-added processing and that kind of thing. And with that, I think it's the end. Sorry I talked so fast at the end.
You totally hit the time.
I'm happy to talk to you later.
Perfectly.
Has questions.
That was amazing. Yeah, so if you have questions for Julia, just start writing them in the chat. We're gonna go to Q&A after Amy. And so I'd like to now hand it off to the great Amy Manzelli, who's gonna dig a little more deeply into New Hampshire specific policy and sort of the planning landscape and things to think about if you live in New Hampshire. So welcome, Amy. Thanks for being with us.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Jamie, will you nod if you can hear me? All right, here we go. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. This has been such a great amount of information so far. Let me introduce myself real quickly. My name's Amy Manzelli. I'm one of the owners at BCM Environmental and Land Law. We work in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. We have offices in Portland and Keene and Concord. And in my practice, I represent farmers in all sorts of circumstances. Sometimes I call it like the happy place type representation, where I'm helping them do a conservation easement or form a business. Sometimes it's the not so happy place where, you know, Julia talked about the nuisance lawsuit and they need legal defense, or they're leasing their land and they have an eviction. And in the course of that representation, the thing that I see very often is that a lot of times there's a disconnect between the city and town regulators in New Hampshire and understanding what farmers need. And it goes both ways. You know, farmers, generally speaking, aren't too in touch with the regulatory processes and how to navigate those. So I'm going to go over a few things today, essentially talk about organizations, laws, and some future trends that I see in New Hampshire and across northern New England. I'm going to touch on agricultural commissions, New Hampshire Agrarian Commons, which is a new model some of you might have heard of, New Hampshire Food Alliance, local regulation of agriculture, and then what I view as some next steps. So I'm just going to dive right into the agricultural commissions, and yes, you can leave it to the token lawyer on the panel to have the most boring slides, which is just the state statutes here. So one of the take homes here is that the ag scene as it relates to regulation in New Hampshire is very much a local thing. That's true with planning, it's true with the agricultural commissions. And prior to 2007, there really wasn't a voice championing the agricultural perspective at towns or cities across New Hampshire. So in 2007, this series of laws passed that created the ability for towns and cities to have agricultural commissions, because that's how we roll here in New Hampshire. The state lawmakers would never say, you know, I declare that all towns and cities have agricultural commissions. No, they set up the authority for the cities and towns to go through a process to establish them for themselves. At this point, we have over 30 agricultural commissions here in New Hampshire. And you can go to the next slide, Megan. It talks about some of the things that they can do. And, you know, I'm not going to read the slide, and the statutory reference is there, so you can look that up if you really want to dive in. the big take home here is that the agricultural commissions exist to sort of lift up agriculture within a local city or within a town. You know, they're the only governmental group in New Hampshire whose sole focus is agriculture. You know, the Conservation Commission is thinking about agriculture plus other things. The Planning Board is thinking about agriculture plus other things. But the AgComs really just focus straight up agriculture all the time. You can go to the next slide. Importantly, they are allowed to have a purse. You know, they can have money from the local government. They can expend money. So that's an important part of how they operate. If you want to learn more about how to set up a really vibrant agricultural commission, I would refer you all to the Agricultural Commission in a small town in New Hampshire called Lee, L-E-E. They have a really active, really vibrant agricultural commission, thanks in part, as these things always are, to a handful of really dedicated folks. I do want to say, though, like a lot of local government, these agricultural commissions really are as good as what you put into them. So it really takes vibrancy and commitment from dedicated folks who serve on these commissions, of course, as a volunteer basis with no pay to make these babies go. So that's an important part of, and some would argue a limitation, but some would argue an asset of how the AgComs work. All right, why don't we go to the next slide, Megan? So the next thing I wanted to talk about that's going on, not only in New Hampshire, but actually across the country right now, is the Agrarian Commons Initiative. So this is a project of the Agrarian Trust, which is a national 501c3. And I'm going to kind of walk through this infographic that we have here, but let me just give a little bit of the history. So Steph talked about some of the history of land ownership and some of the, and then Julia's data touched on some of the problems with, I guess I'll say, disproportionate ownership currently. So and then what I don't think anyone touched on yet, but which I'm sure everybody on this call understands, is that modern farmers carry a very high debt load. And I think that contributed to Julia's, it was, you know, 2,000 plus average figure of average annual income. So this model seeks to disrupt all that and sort of make it better. So in May of this year, my law firm helped form the New Hampshire Agrarian Commons in New Hampshire, the Little Jubba Agrarian Commons in Maine, and the Vermont Agrarian Commons in Vermont, each of them focusing on specific properties and populations that are intended to join the community of farmers in this more equitable way. So specifically in New Hampshire, we have the Monadnock Community Farm, Vernon Family Farm, and Brookford Farm, three existing, well-known, make super yummy products kind of farms, and all suffering from the common modern woes of agriculture. Heavy debt load due to very costly land, competition from more vertically integrated and larger, more distant operations. So what does the Agrarian Commons do? The Agrarian Trust purchases these farms out from the farmers. They then, this is all sort of one fell swoop, right? You can picture it's all one closing. They give, you're looking at the top left-hand corner of the infographic here, a long-term lease with very favorable terms. What that means is low cost and high level of flexibility back to the farmers. And then Agrarian Trust donates the property to the state commons, Agrarian Commons, who then serves as the landlord, takes in the rent, and then expends the rent in support of community agriculture projects, including projects at the member farms. And the commons is made up of the farmers from the farms that are in the project, community members, donors, folks from the Agrarian Trust, and then professional support folks. So this has been really very exciting to be a part of, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this very innovative model unfolds over the years to come. You can go to the next slide. I just wanted to mention briefly here a couple other things going on in New Hampshire. We have the New Hampshire Food Alliance. I would encourage you to look them up. They are housed inside the University of New Hampshire, which is great because that gives dedicated staff people to help with all sorts of projects. They are conveners, they are educators, they have an online Friday cafe, really fantastic group. So I wanted to turn to the local regulation of agriculture, and here I want to key into this image on the left where it says the Local Regulation of Agriculture Toolkit. As you may have picked up from my comments here so far, in New Hampshire, land use, meaning the siting of farms and the uses that are made at farms, it happens at a local level. So we're talking city by city, town by town, one by one. And there are pros and cons to that, and I'm going to mention a couple of those. But whatever your opinion is on that, it is the way it is. That is just how things work in New Hampshire. And so, knowing that part of the system makes it easier to operate within it effectively. So one of the great advantages of this is that the folks at the local level, especially like an agricultural commission, they're probably the best situated to understand local needs, right? I mean, some person from the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets and Foods in Concord, or worse yet, someone from the USD office in Vermont, they're not going to know what a farmer in Madison needs or Madbury. So there's a real advantage to that. But the primary disadvantage, of course, is that you have piecemeal agriculture. And another little data point that hasn't been mentioned yet is that most of the farmers in New Hampshire operate on multiple leased parcels. Now we're going to leave aside the fact that a lot of these leases are just handshake deals and they're not written leases like they should be, because that's a whole nother talk. But they have 50 acres in Hinsdale and 75 acres over here, and then they have the 5-acre patch over here. And when each of those pieces of land can be subject to different local regulation, it does make it really, really challenging for farmers to operate. So that's a major disadvantage of the system. And with that in mind, the state has some really great laws on the books that support agriculture. And I'm going to mention a couple of them. And it's just a couple of them. There are more than this. So RSA 425-2A is a really cool policy called the Granite State Farm to Plate. And it sets forward a state policy that state agencies are supposed to support local agriculture at every possible juncture. And then they even have a kind of flowery, fluffy statement at the end that says that towns and cities, to the extent possible, local governments shall consider the law, policies, and principles of this section when adopting their local laws or when enforcing existing law and regulation. So it's aspirational. The way that I characterize this law is that it's nearly unenforceable, it's completely unfunded, and it is really supremely beautiful. So it's a good starting point. It's a good policy to set forward, but not a lot of teeth. There's room for growth there. Julia touched on nuisance lawsuits. So New Hampshire does have a right to farm law on the books. That's RSA 432-32. New Hampshire's right to farm, as do all the northern New England states, by the way. But New Hampshire's right to farm law is really a very pure and simple version. It just says that if you are a farmer and you're not brand new and you've been doing a good job and you get sued, someone says that you're being a nuisance, you can use this right to farm law as a defense to try to get out of the lawsuit. So it doesn't prevent you from being sued. Anybody can sue anyone at any time, unfortunately. But what it does, it's a little bit of a get out of jail free card. Some states have a much more expansive view of that, not New Hampshire's, but what we do have is really great. Now, 672, RSA 672 states another, makes a proclamation in favor of agricultural activities in New Hampshire, including agritourism, and I'm going to touch on that more in a second. RSA 674-32A is really interesting for zoning nerds such as myself. And what I mean by that is, in New Hampshire, you would go to a town zoning ordinance, you'd crack it open, and you would look up the use that you want to do. Let's say I want to run a daycare. And you look on the list and you see, is daycare listed as an approved use or not? If it's not listed under New Hampshire law, that means you cannot do it unless you get a variance or other sort of special permission. So what the state lawmakers did for agricultural uses is they completely flipped that on its end. They said, if you're going to do an agricultural use and it's not listed in the zoning ordinance, that means it's allowed. So it's a reversal of that zoning presumption, which is a huge benefit for farmers. And then there's the next sections, B and C, RSA 674-32B and C, provide really narrow discretion for cities to regulate agriculture. So those laws put a ton of limits on the planning board's ability to require site plan review for certain agricultural uses. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on the definition of agriculture. The definition of agriculture in New Hampshire is broad, and it actually includes agritourism as part of marketing. And you can look that up at 2134A 2B5. But recently, I'm sure you all know agritourism has been a hot topic for a few years. Recently, the definition was modified to specifically reference events. So that has provided a lot more clarity than used to exist. The problem with all of these wonderful laws is that many towns and cities do not know about them. And that is a huge problem. Oftentimes, you'll have a planning board that says to a farmer who just wants to put in like a grain silo that they need to go and pay and get engineered plans, which of course, think back to those income figures, that's out of reach for many farmers. And actually, it's out of step with New Hampshire law. So one of the things as I transition to what I see as next steps in New Hampshire, that we really need more education of these laws for our municipal regulators. And that is what that local regulation of agriculture toolkit does. I cannot emphasize enough, if anyone is looking to learn more about that topic, look this up. The website for where you can access that is on the resources page that Jamie mentioned. This is a resource that Teresa Walker and I wrote a couple of years back. Hi, Teresa. I saw you signed up for the program. I think it will be very useful to you. So to check that out, you'll see a flow chart that walks through all of these laws, and I hope it's really of use. So there's really three things that we need to have in New Hampshire to keep lifting up local agriculture in an equitable way. As I said, we need, number one, more education for city and town regulators. Number two, we need more inter-organizational coordination. I see a lot of us doing similar things, and there's a little bit of a duplication of effort, and working better together, we could do a lot more. And then we need a plan for distribution and marketing. And that's why the Kearsarge Food Hub and Sweet Beet Market and North Country Farmers Co-op are on here, because those are recent examples of food hub type initiatives that really, I think, are going to be a big part of the future of agriculture here in New Hampshire. So that's it for me for now, and I look forward to questions. Thanks, Jamie.
You bet. Am I unmuted? Yes, I am. All right. All right. So just thank you so much, Amy. That was such great stuff. Just love, this was so great. All of your speakers sort of building off of each other. Please start to put your questions in the chat. A few have come in so far that I'm that I assigned to you. The first, Amy, is for you, just real quick. A question about if agricultural commissions can hold conservation easements in New Hampshire.
Ooh, that's a great question. I do not believe they have the power to hold land. Is there any way Megan can go back to that authority slide? Here we go, we're going back.
Wow.
Let's see, one more. Yes, no. So you see that section there where it says receive gifts of money to assist in carrying out its purpose?
Mm-hmm.
What that would mean is they could facilitate the purchase of a conservation easement that would then either be held by the select board or the city council and managed by the Conservation Commission, or could be directly held by the Conservation Commission. But the answer to the question is no, and I would add, unfortunately.
Got it. We have that power here in Massachusetts now.
Great.
So, that's pretty cool. The next question is for Steph, and if you're ready, Steph, just give me like a thumbs up. But it's basically about if you could share some more strategies and tools for more authentic engagement of Black, Indigenous, and people of color community members and farmers, and how to go about doing that within your own town or community.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually going to share in the text box because this is quite a long resource list that would probably be in and of itself another presentation on top of the webinar 5 presentation. So I'm going to share that now, and this is a platform that we are using with, so it's basically collated by Soulfire Farm, and we've adopted these principles, but I'm just going to make sure that it's okay to share in here so that people can see it. So this is, there are several ways to support Black, Indigenous, POC farmers. And the first one that we have here is regarding policy. And you'll see why this is like, you know, it's not going to, it would take way more than 5 minutes to share a lot of these pieces of information. But, you know, we're looking at policy for farm workers. We're looking at economic viability. One of the things that we're doing, for example, is support working to just offer business planning for farmers of color who often make way less than white farmers, and respectively. For example, in New York State, the average income for a farmer, for white farmers, is about $46,000 a year versus Black farmers, it's negative $900. So even just looking at your programming and what constitutes a farmer is one way that we often get excluded because we don't make enough income as a farmer to be considered a farmer sometimes. So that shuts us out of a lot of programming often, and also with a lot of funding. We, as an organization, Northeast Farmers of Color was created to basically do something called land-based wealth redistribution. So in webinar 5, we'll go over the history of land dispossession and what that means, and how it rolled out, and how that was instrumental in the creation of the USDA in 1862, and what that actually means as far as land and land dispossession and land ownership. So thinking about reversing land-based land dispossession, one of the ways that you can do that, whether it's through Black land loss or land dispossession of Indigenous peoples, is through something called land-based wealth redistribution. Oftentimes we use the words rematriation or reparations in this sense, and we can talk more about Bill HR 40 in webinar number 5, which is the reparations bill. So there's some big pieces around that, and then we're also looking at really community-driven everything. So one thing that I like to share often in sort of an introductory sense is the concept of for us, by us. And what that means is that we are creating systems created by Black, Indigenous, POC farmers, land stewards, and earth workers for our communities. So oftentimes we have a tendency for sort of a paternalistic relationship with mainstream organizations where there's a lot of thinking up programming for Black, Indigenous, POC farmers and community without actually engaging our communities to find out what the needs are. It's very important that anything for our communities is built by our communities. And if that means that inside your organization you don't have any people of color, then deeper community engagement is needed in that sense, outside of just looking at all of the other structures that, that are needed to shift that. So we have reparations, you're making alliances and relationships within the community. You're also, as I mentioned, transforming your organization internally. So looking at, why are there no farmers of color in my community when you're on Indigenous land? Or why, you know, why is it predominantly white in my organization? And not just sort of not questioning that and thinking, oh, well, this is just a really white area. We're all in Indigenous land, and we have Indigenous people all over the place and people of color all over the place. So why have we not been engaged in this way? Also, in grant making and funding, we're looking at supporting organizations led by people of color directly, instead of sub-granting, paternalistically sub-granting through larger wealthy organizations. So that's a big one. And then also just turning the mirror on yourself and starting to do your own unlearning and your own work. And I know I'm bullet pointing this so briefly, but this document that I'm sharing with you is pages and pages long. It's 15 pages. So there's, you know, like a whole study guide here of things that you can do, that you can start knocking off every week or something. So I expect everybody by this time next year to have studied all of this and can teach me about it too. But yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have questions. We're going to do a deeper dive on webinar 5 that will really unpack some of this, but also really focus on some of the key points. But thanks a lot for letting me share.
Great. Thank you so much, Steph. Such a great resource. And I think we have time for maybe one more question, or maybe a second if one comes in. But there's a question here from Peter, which is, are there any efforts to reach out to NECAPA to provide education to planning community about local and regulatory authority? And I'm going to hand that one off to Amy.
The answer is not yet. So the guide that I provided is very New Hampshire specific. But the concepts really translate across all of our New England states. And so that publication came from an ad hoc group for called the New Hampshire Coalition for Sustaining Agriculture. And we are actively seeking funding to expand this to be a Northern New England guide. Once we get that done, we'd then take our show on the road, as we have across New Hampshire. Either Teresa alone or me and Teresa have presented about that publication probably over a dozen times at various statewide and local initiatives. And if anybody wants us to do that in New Hampshire, I love to spread the word about this type of education. So please feel free to contact us about that.
Great. Oh, and Shema's saying, I believe Maine's adapting it to Maine, which is awesome. Cool. All right, folks. Well, I can't believe we hit that right on target of the time. I feel really good about that. If you have more questions, you know, please do put them in the chat, even if we can't get to them. We'll try to follow up with folks. But we're going to transition now to getting to stop listening and going into smaller breakout groups where you're going to get to chat with one another, which I'm really excited about. So the way this is going to work is in a few moments, Megan's going to magically hit a button. And for those of you who haven't been in a breakout group before in Zoom, it's going to be like the Twilight Zone, and you're just going to be with 5 or 6 other people in a room by yourself. And there's going to be about 15 minutes in that group, and you'll have a facilitator there who will identify themselves. And you're going to go through a quick 1-page exercise called Is Your Community Farm Friendly? Quick little checklist, and your facilitator is going to guide you just through a couple sharing opportunities to get the juices flowing and getting us thinking about maybe what are some next steps or actions you can go back after today and do in your community. And so we're going to make sure the facilitators, hopefully you all have your facilitator guide. If you don't, we'll make sure you have it. But I think now, Megan, you can zap us into groups, and then you'll be magically brought back in. It's gonna be great. There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It was so hard to pull away from our conversation. We got cut off at the end there. I'm sure many of you did as you were trying to think through your action items. But we have just a couple minutes here, but I did want to try to do sort of a quick report back, because I'm sure there were just some really great and enlivening conversations. I know our group, Breakout 6, had. And so I thought maybe we could just have a quick report back from those who were facilitators. If you would be willing to just share kind of some high level things that came up in the group, maybe some next steps that people said they wanted to do after today. And maybe we could start with breakout group number 1. Would you mind kicking it off, facilitator?
Stephanie, I was muted. Yeah, I was with Krista, Barbara, and Jessica, and they're all in the New Hampshire area. Sounded like some good conversation around, you know, some of the interesting gaps, specifically in the policies to address food waste. There's interesting, we were talking about the difference between policies and programs, and that there are certainly programs around that are doing this work, but not necessarily policy support. And another gap that we kind of addressed right at the end was the support for value-added processing, like slaughterhouse facilities, cold storage, and packing sheds. Additionally, just discussing a little bit about what makes a successful agricultural easement, and then there has to be bidirectional, you know, interest from both the title holder as well as the land trust.
Great. Thanks, Steph. Facilitator, breakout group number 2. Don't know who you were. All right, we'll skip you for a minute. Amy, breakout group number 3. Oh, there's Megan's child in a diaper. That was cute. Amy, want to share?
Yeah.
Great.
So it was myself, Margot Connors from Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, and Beth McGuinn, who is from Canterbury, New Hampshire, but also has her Five Rivers Conservation Trust hat on, which serves several communities around Canterbury. And so she shared from sort of more of a regional perspective. All 3 of us came away feeling like a lot of our answers were no, and therefore that there was a lot that we could do to be doing better about promoting local agriculture in our communities. I mean, we were really just struck by, like, there is so much more we could do. I thought it was really interesting that Sugar Hill is part of a local chamber of commerce with some of the nearby towns there. I think Margot mentioned 4 total. And that chamber does work to promote local agriculture through things like a farmer's market. So I thought that was great. And as an action item, Beth McGuinn is going to check in with her. Canterbury does have an agricultural commission. She had previously served on the agricultural commission, and but is not sure if they're active right now. So is going to pick that up and do some revisiting with that. And I wrote in the notes that I would try to find someone to con into starting an agricultural commission in Pembroke, New Hampshire.
There you go. Nice. Those are such awesome action items. Go team. That's really exciting. Lots to do. Breakout group 4, Jeremy.
Yeah, hi. We had a great breakout group in session. There was a small group. There were 4 of us in there. Carrie, Beth, and John were in there with me from Concord, Salem, and Keene, respectively. And one of the things we learned was that both Concord and Salem are able to lease some land to area farmers. In fact, Concord leases something like 300 acres. Those are mostly locked up into larger fields for commercial agriculture. So it's of good benefit to the farmers because they're long-term 30-year leases. But as you can imagine, with just a few fields to lease, they don't open up very often, and you can't reach out to more farmers that way. And then Salem does only have one property, but they have some community gardens as well. And their biggest challenge is trying to protect farmland when the competition with development is just so high on their border town with Massachusetts. So those are some of the things that we talked about.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Julia, I think you're up. Is that right? Number 5?
I think so.
All right.
Oh, I'm echoing, sorry. So I had a,
Ooh.
can you turn the sound off? With 2 of us in a room with competing laptops, sorry about that. So I was fortunate to have 2 people who were very familiar and actually helped create the originating town farm-friendly checklist from Durham, New Hampshire. So they have done a lot of work actually in Durham and feel like they've done a pretty good job on most categories. I think the one thing they're still struggling with is how to provide land to producers. A lot more of their land is in conservation, but not available for ag purposes. They have a community garden, but it's tough to find more. And then another thing that they've been struggling with a lot in working with their planning board is trying to get good livestock ordinances. So while there's support for local food and local ag, there's also seems to be kind of a commensurate fear of pigs and roosters. So I would say that's one of the big things they're going to keep working on, if I understood them correctly. And then we had Bill Fosher from Surrey, and he took a look at the checklist and said, well, this is easy. There, I can check off no to most of the items. There's not much going on. So I think, you know, my takeaway is in New Hampshire, there's a big range from not much going on to some people who've been at this for a really long time and are making things happen.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. And then breakout group 6, I was facilitating that. We had a really great conversation. Craig Privet from Upper Valley Land Trust, Sherry Ditsey, sorry if I said your name, last name wrong, Sherry, chair of the Nashua Concom, and Tom Howard, who's with New Hampshire Conservation Real Estate. And we had a really great conversation. You're all doing really incredible work, ranging from UVLT's farm that they acquired that acts as a local food pantry, which is really exciting. Sherry's work, they acquired they protected the last remaining farm in Nashua, which is very exciting. And Tom's great work educating other realtors about the benefits of conservation. So a really dynamic team. And some of the next steps and reflections were Sherry was very interested in getting access through UNH Extension to the real estate trainer guide that Tom was involved with, so that, you know, that we noted that, you know, you just can't keep up with the pace of real estate development. And so educating realtors is a really important step, and providing that education was something that folks wanted to do, as well as just recognizing that maybe your town is supportive, but not really actually understanding what's in the regulatory documents and what could further be advocated for into local bylaws and ordinances. So our group has some good homework to do. So we're just over time here, and I hope you all can stay on for just a couple more minutes as we wrap up. If you could advance to the next slide for me, Megan. That would be great. And I just want to let you all know about the upcoming workshops in this series. Hopefully you learned a lot today, and you were just so enthralled and are hopefully going to come back over the next 5 weeks. We've got one of these a week, jam-packed, and the dates are up there. I won't rattle them all off, but you can check it out on our website if you haven't registered yet. We very much encourage you to do so. We'd love to have you back. And they'll all be just as engaging and exciting, and some great networking opportunities to dig into more of the really nitty-gritty details on some of these important topics. Next slide, please. And yeah, I just wanted to say a very, very special thanks to our presenters, Julia, Steph, and Amy, who came on today. I was really blown away by how much you crammed into this presentation and just your knowledge, and we just so value your wisdom and sharing it with us today. So virtual round of applause for our amazing presenters. Next slide, please. And then just a quick note, you know, as I mentioned, we got a grant from Jane's Trust to do this work, and we really would love to follow up with you. Right after this, we'll probably be sending you an email that includes some of the resources we mentioned today, and just a quick request to do a 5-minute survey. This will help us better follow up with you with any resources. And I also want to note that through the grant, we said we'd follow up with folks, you know, within a year. And so we'd love the opportunity just to check in with you and see if you've done your action item or if you need any support getting that done, just as a way to stay in touch. And then lastly, I just really want to wrap up by saying thanks again for being here with us today. It was a real pleasure. Thanks for being our first in this 15 webinar series that we're kicking off today. Just want to invite you to follow up with me with any questions that you have. And we very much hope to see you next week at the Farmland Protection Workshop. So we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks to our presenters and facilitators, and go forth and let's save some farms. Thank you all.